A battle for the Bronx. Jose Vega has a plan to unseat incumbent Ritchie Torres in New York's 15th congressional district. He joins me now. Thank you so much, Jose, for being on the program.
No, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, why are you running for New York's 15th congressional district?
That's a good question. I've thought a lot about how to answer this, and fundamentally, I think the entire system is broken. The entire government is broken. I'm not here to cozy up with Democrats, even though I'm running in the Dem primary. I'm not here to cozy up with anybody in the established two-party system. I think fundamentally, what's needed right now is a voice in the Congress who's willing to call out everybody. I don't care whether it's Mike Johnson, who's the current Speaker of the House, to Hakeem Jeffries. I don't think that anybody is currently qualified right now with an actual policy plan to rebuild the United States through its roots of what we were actually founded to do. I don't think that anybody talks about Alexander Hamilton enough, nor Henry Carey, who was Lincoln's economic advisor, and how they actually built the country through their economic policies. So I'm running as a way to remind the American people of their tradition, of their history, of actually being anti-tyrannical, but also pro-development and pro-peace as well. And so I'm here running in the 15th congressional district because I was born and raised in the Bronx. And the current congressman is the best example of what I'm talking about the corrupt electoral system. Ritchie Torres is completely bought and paid for. This district is the poorest congressional district in the entire country, and nothing is being done to fix it or alleviate it. Certainly not even from the congressman, let alone the city councilman, the Bronx borough president, the governor. We have a new mayor. We'll see where that goes. I'm honestly, cautiously optimistic. So far, he's been doing okay. Some things he said that I sort of disagree with, but, giving him time, see how it goes. But ultimately, I think that the Bronx politicians and the New York City politicians as a whole have failed the Bronx entirely. And I think it's time for a new leadership, new blood, and somebody who's unafraid to call out everybody who needs to be called out.
Oftentimes, congressional candidates look for the approval of the legacy media or seek endorsements from talking heads or pundits in the legacy media. You've taken a different approach, going more towards and leaning more towards independent media. Why are you leaning more into independent media than trying to get more attention through the legacy media?
Well, first of all, the legacy media will never have me on. I'm known for calling out the legacy media in such a way that has embarrassed and shamed them. So, great example, in 2023, I went to an event at the Columbia School of Journalism where the executive editors of the New York Times was there. So Joe Kahn was there. There was Jonathan Capehart of MSNBC. Then you had the executive editors of Reuters, the Washington Post, and the LA Times. So big legacy media people were there. And this was immediately after Seymour Hersh had revealed that the Biden administration had blown up the Nord Stream pipeline. So I decided to go to this event and say, hey, none of you have actually written about Seymour Hersh. You're all ignoring this very big story that the Biden administration actually committed an act of terrorism against a foreign nation, and as a result has handicapped Germany and their energy supply. So now they're paying 3 times more energy for liquefied natural gas than they were getting through the Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany. So I called them out on this, and I did it in a much more dramatic way. I just completely excoriated them. This video went viral, and it was translated into 9, 10 different languages, and it had millions and millions of views. So, I made myself pretty clear where I stand with the New York Times. I think that they are complicit. They're the liberal apologists for war and genocide, and most of the media today, the legacy media, are just stenographers for the CIA and also for MI6 in Britain and for whatever Israeli intelligence wants them to say. Very clear example right now is CBS News, which was just bought out by Barry Weiss, is doing the same practices they were doing before, just in a much more explicit, in-your-face manner. So yeah, I only trust independent media. I only trust people like Jimmy Dore and Russell Davilar and Keaton Weiss of Due Dissidence and some of my other friends that have had me on, because quite frankly, they let me say whatever I want and they let me be critical. And we don't have to agree all the time on everything, but they let me come on and talk. And people trust them now more than legacy media.
We'll get into your policies in a moment, but your techniques have gone viral. Sometimes you do confront elected officials, or you'll go to events and you'll confront these individuals head on. How would you describe your tactics, and what is your message to those who may be concerned about those tactics?
Um, my tactic, I think it's nonviolent, direct, creative action. That in the spirit of what the civil rights people were doing back during Dr. King's time. And I really am inspired by his letter from a Birmingham jail where he talks about the need to raise attention. He calls it a Socratic tension, where you have to do things like these interventions that raise the tension in the country to where the issue just cannot be ignored. And so, I think more people should be doing it. I'm not violent. I don't want to cause violence or harm to whoever I'm confronting. I think that would actually be hurtful and harmful to the cause of trying to bring attention to the injustices that these elected officials are doing. No, I think they need to be shamed. There's this sort of belief that these people are untouchable and that they're, grandiose, or that they're like magnanimous, and that they can't be criticized, and that they're all powerful. They're not. They're people. They're human beings, and sometimes they get into their heads, into their egos, where they think they're untouchable. So when you go in front of them and you start to ridicule them and you just start to tell the truth about who they actually are, they fall apart. Like in the latest intervention I did, I've done so many of these, I think over 30 of them or so. But in the latest one I did with Ritchie Torres, where I confronted him while he was eating breakfast, he started to run away. He couldn't actually say anything about what I was saying. And he didn't even decide to defend what he was saying. And, as a result, he looked silly and scared from me confronting him directly, and I think more people should be doing that. And for people who might be concerned, I mean, one of the things I've heard is, aren't you afraid you might get arrested? And it's like, well, I mean, you kind of have to go in with that. It's a possibility that can happen, but ultimately, we are nonviolent, and you have a First Amendment right in this country. I have never been arrested for doing this. And all the 30 plus times I've done it, I've never been arrested. And again, I just want to encourage others, as long as you do it nonviolently, you have every right to confront elected officials or big media heads or people who think that they're better than you in one way or another. And you have the right to just go up and tell the truth.
Let's talk healthcare. You believe in Medicare for all, and on your campaign website, you talk about the need to increase current hospital bed inventory. Why do you focus on invest or increasing the hospital bed inventory more than maybe other candidates who just talk about the bread and butter issue of actual insurance? Why do you fixate on that issue?
Because the Hill-Burton standard, that's where we get the sort of measure for, bed space available per Americans, especially if there were to be some kind of emergency or some kind of outbreak or something, is actually a better indicator of the state of your healthcare than it is, just the price of health. Personally, I believe that anybody should be able to walk into any clinic, any hospital, or be able to have their own private doctor or healthcare and not worry about a bill. I think that the country and the federal government should foot the bill majority of the time for health related issues, and I think it's completely possible right now, especially when you have Donald Trump talking about, increasing the military budget. When he was talking about cutting it in half, now he's talking about increasing it from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, which is completely insane. And we're told that healthcare is too expensive. I think that that's just completely absurd. So why I focus. So what if I were to go into the Congress? Of course, I'll be fighting for an actual Medicare for all plan, where people don't have to worry about the cost of healthcare, where they can get the healthcare they need, and also But the reason I focus on the bed inventory space is because I want to address the other issue that lies in healthcare, which is that this country does spend a lot of money on healthcare, but it's not an actual healthcare plan. It's what's called death care. They'll be able to prevent you from dying. They'll be able to take care of you in your deathbed, or they'll give you medication that'll, alleviate your symptoms, but won't actually cure you. No, we actually need a revolution in health, and we need to reopen tons of hospitals that were shut down. We need more medical practices. And so the Hilberton Standard is one measure of your healthcare, your state of healthcare. The more beds that are available per American is a good indicator of how your healthcare is. If there's more beds available per Americans, it means that you actually have better healthcare available for everybody, not just people in rich areas, but even people here in the Bronx, in the poorest congressional district in the country.
Should states have a say in how much they want to invest in healthcare, or should it be completely a federal government plan where every state is investing the same amount?
I believe it should be a federal plan. Not to say that I discount, like, for example, here in New York, we have our basic version of a Medicare for all plan, especially for people who are low income. I think I'm on that as well. And without that, I wouldn't have health care. But as somebody who's running for federal government, I'm not running just to make decisions for this district or even just for New Yorkers or people who live in New York State or New York City. I want every single American citizen to have the benefit that New York State provides for its residents. And I want that on a federal level. And I think it should be done on a federal level. I think the current Medicare for All bill that's been floating around in and out of Congress is basically saying it should be done on a federal level. And they would even absorb a lot of the people who are they would even absorb a lot of the people who currently work for insurance companies that would inevitably go out of businesses, that they would say, well, wait a minute, if we're going to intake all of these American citizens, we're going to need these people who already have the expertise in working in these insurance companies. We'll just hire them to deal with the claims, on behalf of American citizens. So yes, very much federal, top down, has to be that way, especially for healthcare.
And you talk about you mentioned earlier about a revolution in health. Some people will view not just increasing access to healthcare or expanding health insurance, but also when it comes to food quality, water quality, and other issues surrounding health. Are there other health issues besides increasing hospital bed inventory and pushing for a federal health insurance program? Are there any other health issues that would complete that revolution in health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for one, you need a better investment in medical research and medical care. And I think one of the things I would do is probably lift sanctions with other countries that have made advancements in medical technology to work with each other. So, for example, the Russians and the Chinese have made tremendous strides in modern day healthcare. And I think that a lot of the sanctions that we have and a lot of the sort of bilateral or a lot of agreements that we have with the Chinese and the Russians is that we don't share certain technologies. And this came up during 2020 and 2021 when the Russians developed the COVID vaccine Sputnik versus the United States, which took another couple months to do it, when both of our scientists could have been collaborating. Instead, because of the certain rules that were in place between two countries and the sort of sanctions that we have, we couldn't work with each other. So I think, for one, increasing global cooperation and make medical technology and industries much more universal, so that, like, Cuba, for example, has a preventative lung cancer vaccine. And it seems to be working. It seems to be well. So, I think, for one, that would be a big one. Also, I would say we need to invest in medical research in the way we invest in making bombs, in making weapons, and making missiles. I think that, we need to have a military-industrial complex equivalent for healthcare. I want a crash program so that, we can figure out certain diseases that are plaguing people. And also, of course, in diet, too. We need to address the food desert issue. So here in the Bronx, it's very difficult to come by organic produce that isn't, super expensive. And I think it's a shame because here in the United States, we have all this farmland that could actually be used to feed the world 3 times over. I'm not just making up that number. I've spoken to farmers who believe that America alone has enough soil that it could feed and produce food to feed the world 3 times over. But with all these corporate factory farms taking over the family businesses and taking over, the small farms, it's becoming increasingly difficult to actually get quality produce into the hands of people. A lot of healthcare, I think, also happens before people actually get to the doctor's room or to the ER or something. A lot of it does have to do with diet and nutrition and whatnot. And so people do need to get better educated on what kinds of foods to eat. And so for that, we need to bring back stuff like home economics, into schools. We need to make sure that people know how to cook basic meals so that they're not eating out or eating cereal every day. A lot of people don't know how to cook, so I think doing stuff like that, from the top down, universal, working together with other countries on medical research and advancements, all the way down to teaching people just how to take care of themselves at the nutrition level to make sure that they don't even have to go to the ER, and prevent a lot of diseases that could be prevented just from eating healthy and exercising.
Let's transition to immigration. On your campaign website, you say the core issue with immigration reform is economic, but there were those who voted in 2024 based on immigration who believe that immigration is more than just economics. It could be about culture, it could be about religion. How would you respond to those in your district who believe immigration is more than an economic issue?
Well, I don't think it'll be much of an argument here, given that majority of the people in this district were immigrants at one point or another. We have a large Dominican and Puerto Rican diaspora. Puerto Rico, of course, is sort of this stagnant state right now where it's a colony, it's not a state, and it's not independent. But a lot of people feel like they've emigrated from Puerto Rico here or the Dominican Republic here. And also New York City is home to over 150 different languages. So anybody who says that this is a cultural or a religious thing, I think, in my opinion, has no idea what they're talking about. Just come to New York City and you will see Italians living right next to Chinese people. You go down to the Bowery Street, right? You got, Chinatown right next to Little Italy. You've got in Queens, you could see Yemeni food right next to, Iranian food, right next to food from Palestine, right next to Israeli food too. There's Israeli restaurants here too. There's all kinds of cultures that blend here already. Now, the reason I say it's economic is because, right now, for example, you have the Trump administration making what I think is a false argument that the reason why housing is so expensive is because of all these immigrants that are driving up the markets, that drive up the demand and therefore drive up the prices. That's not true. New York alone, at least, the reason why the rent is so expensive here is because the number of jobs that are high paying are limited to people specializing in those fields. So it's either tech startups or medical or lawyer or some kind of high paying accounting job. So you have those kinds of jobs at the top, and then you have minimum wage jobs at the bottom. It's basically that sort of disparity is going on. And the people who make housing in New York City are going to cater to the high paying people, not to the minimum wage earners. And there are no more middle class jobs. They're just disappearing. When before it used to be a productive city, the Bronx used to have ironwork foundries, which people could make a decent living and live a decent, in a decent living conditions. And we've basically gutted that. We've killed that. But immigration, my plan for immigration, I don't think is so radical. I think it would make sense if you look at the entire United States and you look at the fact that the infrastructure is failing. Your cities are falling apart. It's all collapsing. And you don't actually have the manpower right now. Even if you were to employ every single young man and woman who's 18 to 26 years old or 18 to 30, and you were to put them in an emergency crash program, which is what I do want to do. And you say, look, we're going to teach you how to be an engineer, carpenter. Basically, you're going to learn how to be a city builder. If you were to take every single employed young man and woman or unemployed young man and woman, put them through this crash program, the best you could do is rebuild the country in about 10 to 15 years. I'm saying you could do it much faster, and you can also build new cities, much more advanced cities, and you could have high-speed rail within 5 to 10 years if you take the immigrants that are coming here who are young and employed, and you say, look, we will give you citizenship in exchange for you learning how to get these productive skills to build new cities, to rebuild the cities that are falling apart. That way, you give them purpose by allowing them to learn how to be productive, rebuild your cities, and build new cities, and they get citizenship and they get an opportunity at living in this world, in this new country. That way, you can increase your population because the population is actually going down. If it weren't for the immigrants keep the population up, and you could actually completely redesign the United States so that it's actually livable again, where the prices of housing are reasonable, grocery stores are reasonable again, and you could have new schools built up and hospitals built up, and you change the meaning of people's lives.
Let's finish with one topic, and then we'll get to your last words and thoughts, which is your foreign policy approach. And foreign policy has taken center stage, and you've pointed out that that you disagree with the incumbents' foreign policy views, and in fact, and to connect money and to all this, you once said in a 2024 Ballotpedia candidate connection survey that Ritchie Torres is an APAC airhead. What do you mean by that?
Simple. Thanks for taking time to read that Ballotpedia survey. I have to update that because I think a lot of them were just snippy one-word answers. It was like, what issues matter to you? And I said, all of them. So what I mean by that is that Ritchie Torres has been paid $1.5 million by APAC, the American Israeli Political Affairs Committee, which for over 50 years has had such an influential role in our politics in a bad way, meaning that they have paid for many congressional and senatorial and even presidential campaign re-elections. And in exchange for that elected official to pass policy that will be favorable to Israel one way or another. And they don't just do this at the federal level too, they do this at the state level as well. For example, they groom politicians like Ritchie Torres. They paid for Ritchie Torres, well, not APAC directly, but one of its subsidiary groups that APAC also funds and helps. They paid for Ritchie Torres to take a trip to Israel when he was a city councilman, not when he was a congressman, in 2018, 2 years before he would run for Congress. And he credits that trip as changing his views on Israel and why he loves Israel so much. They groom candidates, even before they're in office, they look for them so that they can keep them in there for life. That's how devious APAC is. And it's time for it to come down. And so you have to start by calling out these politicians that have been groomed this way by the Israeli lobby so that people become aware of who's actually controlling their politics. Because how can the poorest congressional district produce a congressman whose number one priority is Israel? That to me is insane. And it's not even just Israel that I disagree the incumbent Ritchie Torres on. That's one thing. Of course, I believe that they're committing a genocide and they have killed thousands and thousands of children and innocent people, all in the so-called fight against Hamas. But he also is a big NATO fan. He gets these trips paid for and sponsored by NATO when he goes to the Baltic Sea, and he thinks that Russia and China are our number one threats and enemies. He called me a tool of the Kremlin, which I think was hilarious. But I think NATO has got to go. NATO has got to go, and I think there needs to be a new security and development architecture. And I think we see elements of that in the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus. Now there's like 23 other nations a part of it. And, we need to join the BRICS. The Chinese invite us to join the Belt and Road Initiative and the BRICS every year, with every new administration. I think we need to join in this sort of emerging new security and development architecture that's emerging. And we need to abandon this old Cold War mentality. I don't think we need to have enemies. We don't need to think in that way. We can have a revolutionary approach, which is maybe the Russians and the Chinese just want the best for their citizens, just like we do. And maybe we can have common ground on that basis. Crazy idea, I know. So
Well, how would you respond then in terms of the Russian point that maybe there could be economic commonalities, or both nations want to see the best economically for their citizens, but the security interests are so different and the contrast could not be any more stark?
yeah, this is why I'm glad I was associated with the LaRouche organization, because your economic interests are your security interests. For example, the Bering Strait Tunnel is something that is completely possible right now. You know, Alaska is only 40 miles away from Russia. And there's talks right now, even though this was talked about for over 50 years, that the current Trump administration could work with the Russians to build a tunnel that goes underneath Alaska into Russia. Both countries would have to cooperate, in order to get this tunnel built. This would also be great for the economy of both countries if you could take a high-speed rail from New York across the country up to Alaska and then be in Russia within a day. If you used high-speed rail, it's completely possible to do that. And so by both countries collaborating, you then develop new means of security. Because if you both have the same economic interests, then you both have the same security interests, which is to not fuck over each other. That's just that, basically, in a nutshell, as to why I believe economic interests are security interests as well. So if you had, for example, not just the Bering Strait Tunnel, but also, two countries collaborating on joint space exploration. Like, for example, there's a resource on the moon called helium-3, which there's like tons of it, and like 2 or 3 canisters about yay big could power countries for centuries. If you had 2 countries working together to go to the moon to mine helium-3 and bring it back for fusion energy research, you could cure energy poverty. There would not be a single person in this planet that would not have access to electricity, a light, a computer, internet. You could do that. And it's only going to be possible if 2 countries, big countries, decide to work together to do this. Now you've radically changed the idea of security, just by saying we both want energy. So,
Well, in terms of, let's say, fighting transnational terror groups like ISIS or AQIM, if 2 nations, they may agree that we need to, let's say, dismantle these 2 groups, but they have a different approach to doing it due to their own economic situation, and they may not, let's say, deploy troops or deploy intelligence to fight off these groups, then there's going to be a conflict with security, and that the security interests are not going to be the same at that given time. So how would you deal with something like that, where yes, you could find economic alignment, but there may be a situation or in a war or other security challenge where both nations can't agree on the methodology to handle a situation?
well, the first thing to do is to abolish the CIA, because, great example, Aleppo, Syria, before the fall of Assad. You know who killed most of the ISIS members? Wasn't the United States. It was Russia. Russia was conducting counterterrorism operations in Syria, and they were cleaning up a lot of the ISIS cells that were in Syria. And that was something that the United States at the time thanked Russia for. But a lot of Al-Qaeda and ISIS was created by the Obama administration through Operation Timber Sycamore, right? We were funding terrorists over there. See, the United States and MI6 in Britain are the 2 leading purveyors of terrorism around the world, which is why I genuinely believe if you just have Xi Jinping, Putin, Trump, and also Lula and some other big nations who just decide to meet and talk about their security interest, if you have more dialogue and you don't have the CIA meddling in it, and you just have honest dialogue between the leaders, I do believe the best outcome will always prevail. I'm a big believer that diplomacy and dialogue can always beat out war, especially in this era of nuclear warfare, where war between 2 nations will just immediately amount to a nuclear holocaust. So I'm a big believer. Dialogue will lead to peace as long as it's allowed to happen. Because what we've seen so far is the British meddle. Every time Trump wants to talk to Putin or Xi Jinping, some incident, some global incident happens to prevent that dialogue. Because there's something that stops these leaders from meeting. Because good things tend to happen when Trump meets with Putin or Xi Jinping. But when they don't get to talk to each other, and Trump is only listening to his immediate cabinet, which is completely filled of neocons and Zionists and British infiltration, he does the worst things possible, like capturing Maduro. I guarantee you, if he talked to Xi Jinping and Putin and said, we have security problems in Venezuela, we don't trust this. All right, well, let's talk it through. Let's figure it out. Can we come up to a resolution? I honestly think that would have happened, if he had just talked with these other leaders as opposed to listening to his dumbass cabinet like Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio. I'm sorry, it's not very professional of me.
Last question before you get a chance to say anything that you would like. At the very end, you said abolish the CIA. If elected, members of Congress get briefed by the CIA. How would you handle a briefing from the CIA if you would like to see it abolished?
If I have to, you mean like, what am I going to do if I have to be briefed by the CIA? Well, yes. I would listen to what they have to say, and I would probably question the hell out of them. One of my favorite stories is from, I think it's Bill Binney. He was the former technical director of the NSA. And he basically told me that the person who goes and briefs these congressmen usually never brief the congressman directly. They usually brief some kind of top aide or something, some chief of staff. And the briefer never gets scrutinized, or if he does, it's always, oh, just refer to my supervisor. And the CIA only really cares to brief the people who are on the intelligence committees. But let's say I was on the intelligence committee. I'm going to scrutinize the hell out of the CIA. I am going to bring them, and they're going to have to testify to me. For example, like what's going on in Iran, right? There's a big thing going on right now about whether or not, the Ayatollah committed war crimes against its own people, how many people it shot. And, there's a lot of pressure on me to denounce what Iran is doing. Okay, well, I will do that if I can be completely assured that the CIA is currently not agitating anything over there. If somebody can guarantee to me that the actions of Iran and the Iranian government are completely organic and it is not CIA induced, which I have no reason to believe right now because the CIA admits it's over there, I'm not going to say shit about the Ayatollah because I know my government is influencing events over there right now. So I have no business criticizing how another foreign government wants to handle our meddling. Because, yeah, we are in there meddling, so we should not be doing that. And so I think that we would need to develop a new sort of system. Something new has to replace the CIA because, the CIA has been acting rogue ever since the Obama administration. And I think it needs to be changed and replaced. And I'll listen to what they have to say. And then I'll just be like, yeah, okay, this is bullshit, basically. I don't believe a damn word you say. It's known that the CIA... most of the people who, like, for example, this Senator Slotkin is former CIA. There's no such thing as former CIA, okay? You are always loyal to the agency one way or another, unless you've gone through big sort of redemption, like Ray McGovern is probably the only person I trust who was former CIA, who is no longer CIA anymore and is a complete peace advocate. So the bar is very, very high for me to trust you if you're so-called former CIA. But yeah, I think that our intelligence agencies just need to, like, everybody in them just needs to be completely abolished and it needs to be redone. And our idea of intelligence has to just completely change. But that's for another discussion. I have ideas on that, but.
Well, you can continue with that because if you want, or you can say anything that you would like at the very end here. Some candidates will plug their campaign website. You could do whatever you want. Jose, the floor is yours.
I think that the problem today in the country is that people haven't decided to be free. What do I mean by that? I think that we can complain about the bad actors in our government. We can complain about the Trump administration. I can complain about Ritchie Torres. The fundamental truth is that the founders of this country 250 years ago gave us a document called the Declaration of Independence, where they say that the government has to run on the consent of the governed. I don't think many people have read that document in a very long time. And if they did, they would decide that they have to declare their independence again and decide who they want to be governed by. And ultimately, the onus is on the people for electing these bad actors to begin with. And so what I want to do here in the Bronx is start a process, start a program, start something where everybody in the Bronx reads the damn Declaration of Independence and declares their independence again. Because I think people need to decide they want to be free, and it starts by reading that document. And if people want to support me, volunteer, donate, they can go to votevega.nyc. And I will personally call you and thank you for your donation and for volunteering and how to get just set up and going. So I want to also thank you for having me on your show, and read the Declaration of Independence. That's how I want to end it. If you disagree with anything I said, if you think I'm totally full of shit, fine. Take this away, though. Just read the Declaration of Independence and decide that you want to be free.
Jose Vega, thank you so much. And that's the end of the interview.
Awesome. Thank you. This was fun. I like these.